"What business do you have in the Goblin King's royal chamber?" boomed a voice. Tom scanned the area but couldn't find the voice's origin. The crowd parted to reveal the biggest dang goblin you've never seen. You are now listening to the transcendent sounds of
Nobbin.
The legendary legend of the New Year Goblin. A Christmas tragedy for the New Year, Part 3. I don't care how many goblins you've seen. You've never seen one this big. I bet you've never even seen a real goblin. Tom cringed into his goblin guards as the enormous goblin moved toward him. "State your business, human." Tom tried to stammer a response.
I...
Before devolving into incoherent whimpering and mumbling. It sounded like two cats trying to climb up a chalkboard while mumble rapping.
He wants to challenge the king,
said one of the goblins who brought Tom to the Goblin Kingdom. Positive this giant goblin was the king, fear motivated Tom to regain his senses. "No, I want to form an alliance, to declare war on the elves." The huge goblin asked the cliched question, "You and what army?" At least it wasn't in the usual context. Tom looked around, then down at the ground before mumbling, "Just me?" The cave went silent until the massive goblin broke into a fit of laughter. The rest of the goblins joined in, creating a cacophony of screeching laughter. "What do you bring to this alliance, puny human, other than the smell of urine and feces?" Tom just stared at him, with his mouth agape. "That is what I thought. Prepare the fire. Tonight, we dine on human." The goblins erupted in a cheer, though no one considered how a kingdom full of goblins was going to feast on one skinny, barely teenage human.
Yummy. Wait!
Tom yelled. He searched for an attribute that could benefit the goblins, one skill or ability that could make him useful to the goblins. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Tom hoped to Chow Yun Fat that it still worked after the beatings it took and the fluids it must have consumed. He pressed the button, and its face emitted a soft glow in the cave.
"I have technology!"
Laughing again, the mammoth goblin reached into his loincloth and pulled out his phone. "We have cell phones. We run Google. They give us free pixel phones." Dejected and out of ideas, Tom slumped. A goblin grabbed Tom's arm and raised it in the air.
"The boy wants to challenge the king!"
Tom looked at the mountain of a goblin standing before him. He stared at the hands, capable of smashing his head like a snowball. "Is that right, boy?" boomed the massive voice of the Grand Goblin. Tom's throat closed around the air he tried to pull into his lungs. If he remembered what words were, or how to articulate them, he would say,
"No, sir. This is a big misunderstanding. I'm sorry to bother you and disrupt your kingdom. I should go."
Of course, all that came out was a horrible wheeze that the goblins took for a pathetic battle cry. "All right, then." The goblin covered half of Tom's back with his hand and guided him forward. "Challenge!" he boomed. The goblins formed a circle, and the giant goblin led Tom to the center. The goblins surrounding Tom hissed and jeered at him.
You stink. Meow. Make way for the king.
A path opened on the opposite side from which Tom entered the makeshift ring. A tiny, frail goblin entered, aided and guided by a cane and another large goblin. Even this goblin was small compared to the giant goblin Tom mistook for the king. The goblin aide aimed the tiny, frail goblin at Tom and released him.
To the death!
The colossal goblin yelled, more to the crowd than the combatants.
Fight!
Fear and confusion petrified Tom. Was this the Goblin King? Or the Goblin King's great-grandfather? If this was the king, why hadn't anyone challenged him before? Any of these goblins could defeat him. What would they do if he hurt the king? What if he killed the king? Would the goblins execute him? While Tom was pondering, the Goblin King struck him upside the head with his cane. There wasn't much force behind the blow, but it still hurt like being struck upside the head with a cane. The crowd cheered as Tom stumbled backward into the goblins behind him. They pushed him back into the goblin ring of death. In stumbling forward, Tom knocked the Goblin King back into the opposite side of the ring. The goblins hissed and growled at Tom. The Goblin King looked around, dazed and confused. He got disoriented as the crowd pushed him back into the ring. The Goblin King swung his cane again. This time, he almost dispatched a chunk of the front row. He staggered around, alternating swinging his cane and using it to support himself. Still unsure of what to do, and wary of hurting the ancient goblin, Tom shuffled around the ring, avoiding the Goblin King. When the Goblin King wandered too close to the crowd, they launched him toward Tom. Tom avoided him, and he ended up on the other side of the circle, where a new collection of goblins pushed him toward Tom. This went on for at least 11 minutes and 38 seconds, before the Goblin King took a misstep, or someone shoved him too hard, and he fell near the middle of the arena. As he lay prone, Tom eased over and grabbed his cane. Without it, the Goblin King was stuck. He couldn't get up. His cane may not have been sufficient to get him up without aid from one of his assistants. Tom stared at the Goblin King, flailing on the ground like an unmotivated, legless infant zombie. The goblins watched Tom, unsure if he was their new king or if he was still on the menu. The Goblin King surveyed the crowd, unsure of how to proceed. After a long pause, a chant arose among the goblins.
Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Meow.
Tom wasn't sure if they were chanting about him or to him. Were they going to kill Tom? Or was Tom supposed to kill the king? The giant goblin pushed his way into the ring. He stomped toward Tom. Tom cringed as the goblin reached for him with his enormous hand. He took Tom's hand between his index finger and thumb, as one might pick up a used tissue, and held it aloft.
The Goblin King is dead. Long live the Goblin King!
The Goblin King wasn't dead. Tom later learned that they moved him to a goblin retirement home, where he lived out the rest of his days, still thinking he was the king. He gave a plethora of orders and had many attractive young women visitors, who he didn't realize were nurses. Tom's primary mission was to acquire a new wardrobe that made him appear to be a kid dressing up as David Bowie for Halloween. He saw the movie Labyrinth and knew how a proper Goblin King should look. On his first day, Tom learned why no one had challenged the former Goblin King, and why his predecessor's brain was so fried. The job consisted of paperwork and dealing with bureaucracy. He got to sit on a throne and wear a crown, but his days comprised seeing goblins who had complaints about other goblins and coming up with fair settlements for their disagreements. When he finally got to give an order, his first was to launch a full-scale assault on the North Pole. He settled for hacking into their computers. These goblins were Google employees, not warriors. The hack uncovered important information. Tom Majors was number 1 on Santa's most naughty list. Santa might be sexist. He had a second secret naughty list that only featured women. The most important piece of information Tom learned was concerning the elf assigned to his case, Winston, Effervescent, Cotton Pepper. and a personal vendetta was born. Winston, who melted from this story as if he were a snowman spending his summer vacation in Death Valley, had been tracking Tom until the goblins took him into their custody. Goblins have high-tech anti-tracking devices. I don't know how it works. I'm not a goblin. I just know you've never seen a goblin, and there's a good reason. Anti-tracking technology. When Winston lost the feed from his drones, he made a trip to the Walmart, where Tom met the goblins. He tried to track the goblins, but their trail of droppings ran out sooner than normal, since they expended so much on Tom. He only made it to Percival Street before losing them. Upon his return to the North Pole, Winston checked his trackers. Everything went blank after the goblins left Walmart. He checked with other Naughty or Nice observers, hoping someone picked up a sign of Tom Majors in their tracking. Crossover tracking was scarce, but it happened. No one confirmed a sighting, but a few reported interference around the time Tom disappeared. Winston created a timeline and a trail from these reports, and tracked the goblins to the Ural Mountains, where the trail ran cold. No pun intended. The 2,500-kilometer stretch of mountains that are largely uninhabited by humans is the perfect place to hide a goblin kingdom. Winston had no hope of finding a single boy in the mountain range. Even the elf satellites couldn't find any trace of the clandestine base, much less the boy Winston hoped was kidnapped by the goblins, instead of going full villain. Tom learned about Winston and his search for him from the goblins' hack of the elf's system. He decided to set a trap. Tom let Winston see him atop the Ural Mountains. His plan included a pair of goblins who made it look as if he were escaping. As soon as Tom showed up on the elf's radar, Winston hopped in a sleigh and set off for the Urals. A few other elves tried to warn him to be cautious and take backup, but Winston's haste pushed him to ignore their advice. He landed his sleigh a few meters in front of Tom and encouraged him to hurry to get in. Tom ran toward the sleigh, but feigned tripping and fell behind the sleigh. Winston got out to assist Tom. Tom grabbed Winston's arm and held him until the goblins arrived and took him into custody. Other goblins, who used tracking blockers, took the sleigh and accompanying reindeer. To be concluded.
Oh, Charlie,
It's the chicka chicka chuck, y'all. The chicka chuck, y'all. The chickity 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 chuck, y'all. Delightful.
Delightful.